Well, this is a story we have all heard from childhood. Peter walking on water. It was used as proof that we should have faith. If Peter had enough faith, he could have stayed walking on top of the waves. But when his faith wavered, he started to sink and had to be rescued by Jesus. It made me realize as a child that I didn't have nearly enough faith, as my feet always went right through the water down to the bottom, or until I started to swim if the water was deep. We Canadians, and people in many other temperate countries, have a simple explanation for the ability to walk on water. We do it every winter. As kids, we would skate and play hockey on the frozen river. Adults would curl there too. I have many times walked across the lake in the middle of winter back when I had a cottage. Once the ice was thick enough, it was perfectly safe. When spring was approaching and we would walk across the lake, we could feel that spring in our step. We could feel the ice less solid underfoot, shifting slightly. Soon after that, it became too soft for safety, and we would stop until the following winter. Peter never had such an option in his country. Way too warm a climate for ice and frozen lakes, no matter the season. But being rescued by Jesus, that would be wonderful too. So even if our faith wasn't strong enough to keep us on top of the waves, as long as Jesus would rescue us, we would stay safe. That is, if we had enough faith to believe that Jesus would save us. Peter had something we have never had the blessing to experience, the living Christ. We have stories and Bible verses and sermons and readings and faith and prayer, but not the chance to see and know the living Christ. We were born 2,000 years too late for that. Now, I know a few people claim to have had the experience to have heard the word of God, to have spoken to and been spoken to by God or Jesus. I suspect that is the basis for at least a few of the calls to ministry by our ordained clergy, a direct call from God. But I am just a simple person and have never had anything even approaching that experience, and I suspect that most of you would fall in the same category. We are good people, living our lives as best we can, with as much faith as we can muster at any particular time, attending church, going to committee meetings, virtually meetings these days, helping out at the church in any way that our talents allow, but no direct line to God. This story of Peter walking on water always makes me think of Wile E. Coyote. Not that he walked on water, but he often walked on air. He would walk right off of a cliff and just keep on walking. Everything was fine until he lost concentration and looked down. Then it was all over and he would plummet like a rock to the valley floor below. Luckily, he was never badly hurt. Such was the life of a cartoon character, or maybe a miracle each time. When I watched these cartoons as a child, I always hoped that Wiley would not look down so that he could continue to walk on air until he was safely back on solid ground. But it never worked out that way. It made a better cartoon story when he suddenly realized the precariousness of his situation, 1,000 or more feet from the valley floor, nothing but air between him and that valley floor, and then he was plunging down to that valley floor. Peter must have felt much the same. Probably he couldn't swim. In many paintings, he was dressed in flowing robes that would have dragged him down, although other sources suggest that fishermen worked in a loincloth sort of garb, and other sources suggested that fishermen worked naked. However he was dressed, Peter felt the love and support of God and Jesus as he stepped off the boat onto the waves, but lost that feeling as he heard the noise of the wind and saw the large waves under his feet. He doubted his ability, and maybe even doubted Jesus' ability to keep him safe. The disciples are in the middle of a stormy lake, in a small boat, at the mercy of the storm and waves. As they struggle to stay afloat, they see Jesus walking toward them, walking on water. This caused them even more fear than did the storm. No living person could do what they saw Jesus doing. They feared that Jesus was dead and they were seeing his ghost. It was a dangerous time, and Jesus was becoming more well known, and getting known by certain authorities was dangerous. So it wouldn't have surprised them if Jesus had been killed in the short time since they had been together. At the time of the writing of this gospel, Matthew's church is weathering a storm of persecution. These Christians are not in rebellion, but are faithfully serving God. The story of the disciples on the sea, therefore, mirrors exactly the situation of Matthew's church. It holds a promise that Jesus comes to Christians in the midst of a storm, that the storm does not hold the upper hand, that Jesus is present with us in the storm and saves us from the storm. This story reassures Matthew's church that even in the midst of persecution, they need not fear. Jesus is present with them. It offers the same reassurances to us in times of illness, death, persecution, or other troubles. It prepares us for times when things are going badly or well. Looking at the big picture, this is the story of every Christian, our story too, as we move back and forth between doubt and faith, sometimes focused on the storm and sometimes focused on Jesus. How many of us are staying comfortably in the boat that is our church, that is Ebenezer United Church, sitting back, waiting for somebody to do something, but without ever thinking of doing it ourselves? How many of us have stood up against someone bullying a stranger on a bus or berating a person in a grocery store because of his nationality or her skin color? How many of us say we are not racist, but never do anything to prove it? Talk is cheap. It takes action to make a difference. How many of us have the courage of Peter to face the unknown, face our fears, face danger, and even though falling short, doing what we must to get to Jesus? Jesus gently chastises Peter for being of little faith, but the other disciples, the ones who stayed in the boat, showed no faith at all. So here we are, sitting in the boat with the rest of the disciples, seeing something really scary. But we don't have to do anything. We can just be one of the disciples. A pretty good person to be, right? We have it all figured out. We have our place assured. But then we see one of our number take it to the next level, walk on the water to Jesus. We all sit back to see how it goes. No need for us to get involved. We're doing okay where we are. The boat's still afloat. We'll make it safely back to land. Then we see the risk takers start to sink. Well, serves them right. Maybe he should have just stayed in the boat, stayed safe like us. But maybe we're the ones who should have. Peter lost faith, started to sink. But maybe if we had all acted together, we would have been able to support each other. Maybe none of us would have sunk into the waves. Maybe we would all have reached Jesus. I've spent most of my life sitting in that boat, being a good person, a decent person, if one can be either by just sitting back and doing no major wrong to others. But what if more is required? What if we don't achieve goodness or decentness by sitting back, but must boldly exit the boat to confront whatever dangers await us outside of that safety? When we see a walking on water moment, what will we do? Sit safely back and let others take the risk, or step over the edge into the unknown and become part of the story?